I'm Mark Gagan and you're listening to the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go, now part of Sapiens, enabling enterprise-scale underwriting through a single pane of glass. Today's podcast is one of those conversations that stretch my ability to keep up with my interviewee to the limit. Andrew Johnston is the Global Head of Insurtech at Gallagher Re and has been at the forefront of understanding and chronicling the Insurtech phenomenon since it emerged over 10 years ago. Gallagher Re's quarterly reports on the topic have been required reading over the past decade for anyone wanting to understand the intersection between insurance and technology. In that period, digital disruption, blockchain, parametric and embedded insurance are themes that have come to the fore. Now AI is the dominant force, so much so that Insurtech and AI are now effectively synonymous. Gallagher Re's latest quarterly Insurtech report is one of the best pieces of research into AI and insurance that I've read. It goes way beyond AI-related Insurtech investment opportunities and digs right into the profound risk implications of AI as an emerging casualty peril in its own right. Andrew is a dream guest, incredibly sharp, bright and fun to spend time with. He's that rare kind of person who makes you feel more intelligent for having spent time chatting to them. Listening back, there are points in the conversation where whole new avenues of questioning were opening up that I failed to explore. But that's the mark of a strong interview. It always leaves you wanting more. It's a bit like when you wake up the morning after a big debate or argument, with terrible pangs of regret that you failed to ask the killer question in the heat of the moment. I highly recommend that you go to the podcast notes and download the report as an accompaniment to this conversation. It's the sort of publication that you'll keep coming back to for reference long into the future. The developments in AI are moving so fast that I feel certain it won't be long before I have Andrew back on the show to help put everything into context for us. But until then, this is the next best thing. Enjoy the podcast. Andrew, welcome to the Voice of Insurance.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark.
It's really good to be here with you. First, tell us how you got into insurance in the first place.
It's a long story. So I'm a failed academic. I was at university for far too long.
You can't fail.
I definitely
academia,
did.
surely.
I did.
There's no pass rate at that point.
Well, I just couldn't sort of turn it into a profession, I suppose. And then I ran a couple of startup businesses in agriculture, including an alpaca business that I ran. I had a sea cucumber business.
Were you breeding them?
No, I was shearing them. So I went to various farms and would...
They're quite fashionable, so it was a growth industry, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very lucrative and I had a great time and I got to see the world. But it's definitely a sort of younger person's
Do you source
job.
them? Is it Bolivia, Peru, where they come from?
Originally, yes. They're in the camelid family.
Do you have to go and source them from the main herd?
No. I mean, people own them in all over the world. So there are farms in the States, and we used to shear in Germany and Australia, and they're all over the place.
And alpacas are nicer than llamas. Is that?
Yeah.
Llamas are horrible, and alpacas are nice. Is that the thing?
Yeah, I think you can make that sort of general rule.
What academic subject were you trying to be academic in?
So my PhD was in political violence, specifically in genocide in Cambodia. So that was picked up by the UN. I went to live in Cambodia for a while, and then that job came to an end. And I returned to the UK with my tail between my legs a little bit. And my dad, who was a Lloyd's person, said, look, why don't you think about reinsurance? And I said, absolutely not. And then unemployment lasted a little bit longer and I capitulated. So I thought reinsurance broking was a good option.
Yeah, but why not political violence then?
I think when you look at your career trajectory, you sort of think what's going to ultimately make me happy, and it's quite a dark subject. So I think I made the right choice in doing something else. I think
maybe you're right. So you've got us right up to date now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a wonderful thing that you've made this investment actually as a business. It was over 10 years ago now, and I remember because I was the editor of an insurance magazine saying, "Oh, this Insurtech stuff is sort of really happening now. It's got a name." And we were starting to do conferences about it. We're thinking we're going to make our own kind of investment. We're going to have to designate one of our reporters will have to have this Insurtech beat and sort of be around it and make sure that we know what's going on. I think Gallagher as a broker made the most investment. You've made that leading investment.
Thank you.
And your report is the standard literature.
That's very kind of you to say.
Well, it's not. I don't have to be kind because it's just fact. I'm just a journalist. I deal in facts. It's a fact. But you've made that investment over time. You could see that it was growing into something. And you've now got a fantastic chronicle of that going right to the beginning. So no one's better qualified than you to tell us about the Insurtech funding environment because you've been really looking at it and studying it quarter by quarter for many, many quarters now.
Yeah, so the first report went out in 2017, and I think...
It was very early.
Yeah, it was, and who knew where it was going to go? But academia and research was what I knew, and publishing was what I knew. So I think for me, it was almost a safe space, and I knew that if I wanted to build this brand for what was then Willis Re, in the Insurtech space, I needed to get something published in print because it adds that layer of credential. And at that time, one or two fairly major investments had been made under the label umbrella of Insurtech, primarily the investment made by Ping An into Zhong'an in China. And the securities audience and the kind of ILS audience and the investment community were asking us a lot of questions about whether or not these were investment opportunities for the industry. And to your point, all of a sudden there was this sort of Cambrian explosion of conferences and everybody sort of talking about it. And the conversation at that time, so we are talking about 2016, was very much about disruption, being usurped. And we had quite a few worried clients, if I'm honest. Were these new digital MGAs going to disrupt them? So I felt like it was incumbent upon us to try and give this fact-oriented, objective view on the space. And the last 10 years from an investment perspective has been absolutely fascinating. We've gone through very, very high peaks, quite low troughs, and we're now starting to hit a period of consistency, which is very, very in line with the Gartner hype cycle, if you're familiar with that shape. I mean, you could almost draw it onto the investment parabola that went into Insurtech and continues to.
Yes. I mean, so you'd say it's a pretty healthy state. We're getting to the sort of realistic, we've been through the trough, we got overexcited. The ones who are going to lose money have lost money on slightly frivolous things that didn't make any sense, now with hindsight. And now we're climbing up the sort of, what do they call that in the Gartner?
It's the plateau of comfort or something like that. Yeah. So I would agree with that. And I think that the companies that are raising capital are generally coming to the table with very sound business propositions. I think we as an industry understand the opportunities a lot better. And that's reflected in the grey matter of those who are investing. Insurers and reinsurers are investing at unprecedentedly high rates at the moment, but they're generally into companies that are supporting back office efficiencies, rules-based automation, and they're all quite sensible, pragmatic, mature decisions. And it's not speculative bets on the poster child of the moment. And I think that's an indication of a very healthy evolution of the space.
Well, one thing though, I was reading your latest report, and we're going to have links to that at the end of the podcast and the notes, of course. And I highly recommend everyone read it because there's so much in it. I mean, I used to publish a monthly magazine, and if you get over 100 pages, you're doing pretty well. And this is over 100 pages. Because, of course, in this digital age, you keep scrolling. Where before, when you had an actual publication, you could see it was 100 pages before you opened it. Whereas actually now, you get to page one, you don't know when it's going to end. And I kept thinking, this is pretty good. It must be about to have, the last page. But there was just so much more to read. I kept thinking, goodness me, I need to read this other bit because otherwise I'm going to miss lots of good questions to ask you. But obviously the first question has to be, was it 95.6% of all the money?
Yeah.
I mean, logically, is going into AI at the moment. And, you talk about poster children, and we could go back through your back issues and we go, what was it? Parametric, and then it would have been embedded, and it would have been, goodness knows what. Yeah, blockchain. We've all forgotten about blockchain. Yeah. Is AI just the latest thing, or is it there's something more substantial behind it? And it's almost as if you want to get funding these days, you have to have .ai in your domain name.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's probably both things. So I think that AI is already proving to be a transformative series of softwares, and that's what it is. It's not one thing.
Because it's so horizontal, isn't it? I mean, it goes across absolutely everything.
It sits on top of technology, and I think that's the thing that people don't fully appreciate. And actually, when most people are talking about AI, they're actually talking about automation. But I think in terms of true intellectual AI, we are already seeing it having an impact in our industry. And it is undoubtedly the technology that is in vogue right now, but I think it has a staying power that probably other technologies don't, for the reason you just expressed. It sits on top of existing technology. But I do also think that for funding purposes, there is very much a sense from the community of founders that to be taken seriously, they have to have AI in the name. And I think from a valuation perspective, it probably does add value.
I suppose you can't call yourself tech without having AI.
But in 1999, companies were referring to themselves as sort of .com companies. We would laugh somebody out of the room right now if they said that they were a .com. And I just think that there is an evolution of terminology that goes alongside all of this. But actually, a lot of the companies that are raising money successfully have been raising money for the last 10 years. And actually, they just have a new identifier as part of their company identity. And they may have had AI type functionality all along. There just wasn't the kind of social pressure to pay mention to it. So I think it's both. I think there is an identifier, there's a paint that needs to go on the wall, But I also think as a inherent technology set,
Yeah,
it is
they
real.
would have all said, yeah, we're using machine learning for this or for that or the other.
Right.
It's just probably, yes, now it's absolutely explicit, and it's the first sort of tick on the box for the due diligence.
And then it'll go away again, right? Because it will be assumed that it's so synonymous that there's no need to call it out, which is what we see with every technology hype cycle.
And what about those investors who've been around for that time? You know, these were quite mature tech investors, so I suppose they already knew that there'd be a hype cycle. And I suppose they were probably ready for it, and they knew that some of those valuations they were investing at, they were unlikely to get their money back, but should we say, at some of those really frothy valuations early on. When Insurtech comes to a venture capital fund and says, hey, here's the pitch, do they sit with their arms folded and say, oh, not you lot again? I mean, I've been so burnt by you guys in insurance, you know, I prefer biotech or whatever, something else.
Yeah.
How do they feel? Or is it quite a mature moment?
It's many things. I mean, there are the tourist VCs and PEs that did make very speculative bets that in some cases lost a lot of money, that probably wouldn't want to touch this space again. You then have very, very nuanced, sophisticated, Insurtech-specific funds that, generally speaking, have done well and love this new wave of technology. To my earlier point, insurers and reinsurers are now parting with more checks than they ever have. But I think that the underlying thesis hasn't changed, in that there is a multi-trillion-dollar industry that is seen as being, I don't want to use the word ripe, but there is an opportunity to make inroads with technology that could return an equity play. And that's not lost on any investor. It's just about finding the right business that has the right opportunity that is adding long-term value. I think these quick exits are probably a thing of the past.
Yep. So what are the sorts of AI-related ideas, particularly, I mean, now that we're at a stage where every carrier, every broker has already implemented AI, a lot of the low-hanging fruit is being plucked at the moment, and the kind of really obvious stuff, the sort of, you know, structuring unstructured data. Presumably now, if someone's asking for money today, for many millions today, what sort of pitch are they coming with now, and what sort of premise are they? Obviously, you've got to pitch it on the basis that you're going to make 100 times your investment. What sort of pitch today, with today's technology, are those young businesses making?
I think the smart ones have come to the pitch table with a bit more humility than we saw about 10 years ago. And I think there's more realism. And, you know, I hear less and less these sort of grandiose statements around our industry being fundamentally broken. I mean, I just don't sort of hear that kind of stuff anymore. But in terms of companies actually looking to get into the space, I think that they better understand that it has to be embedded in and around a traditional business outcome, right? Like, it cannot create a situation that isn't really solving a problem. And so the best use cases that we're seeing of AI at the moment are things like claims fraud detection. So the tool is already modeled on a business outcome, or it could be sentiment ingestion from an email or quoting from an API file or whatever. But it's not just what we saw 10 years ago, which is we're all really clever. We've built this really clever tech. You guys figure it out. And I think that that, again, speaks to the evolution of people learning from other
coming with
mistakes.
use cases, saying, look, we know the industry, the problem you have with claims is this, or we've got this, we've got that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're far more sort of user-friendly, should we say.
Yeah.
So it's a much more mature pitch than it ever was.
Yeah, and I think most of these companies now go to the effort of consulting with insurance people. Again, we're seeing much more of the insurtechs looking to raise capital have got that balance between tech expertise, but also market expertise, which we didn't necessarily see 10 years ago. And I think that they're understanding it's in their interests to come to the table with case studies. And to get the best out of AI, you've got to model it. So you've got to have a use case. And so it lends itself quite well to expediting the conversation, because you've got to do that anyway.
And so they're coming much more as a service proposition to the insurance industry. They're not coming and say, hey, I need $1 billion because I also need an insurance balance sheet.
Right.
It doesn't sound like that's the sort of thing. They know I've got some fantastic tools that the insurance industry is going to want.
Yeah. I mean, there are still some sort of MGAs looking to raise money, and there are some digital full stack companies that like the label of Insurtech. But I would say we are seeing a much greater move towards those companies supporting the existing landscape.
Well, I always thought that was absolutely genius, because, of course, technology will get fantastic multiples of whatever you want to measure, because particularly it's difficult when there isn't much revenue or much profit, or certainly no profit, and you're 100 times this or 100 times that. When, of course, insurance balance sheets are getting 1.2 if they were lucky at the time, or hovering around book value. And, of course, if you could apply the 100 times multiple just to a dumb bit of capital that is attached to risk-taking and insurance, as far as I'm concerned, that is genius.
Yeah.
because, there's the intellectual property capital. Of course, we should have a very high multiple attached because it's very intellectual and hopefully it's incredibly valuable and brainy ideas. Should be highly valued. But of course, I'm not saying capital isn't dumb, but £1 in my pocket is the same as £1 in your pocket.
Right.
So again, maybe if you're incredibly clever at allocating that in the risk in the insurance market, yours could be valued at £3 and mine could be valued at 0.8, because I'm a dunce and you're very clever. It's that kind of order of magnitude, not 100 times.
Right. I think as well, people are realizing what the value of that conversation is starting to look like. So again, 10 years ago, it wouldn't be unusual for us in 1 week to meet with, say, 5 or 6 companies that were all presenting more or less the same total addressable market figures to us, just assuming that all of that business was ripe for the taking. And all they had to do was put it into a tech-enabled balance sheet type situation. And you could then use the TAM, the total addressable market, as some kind of lever to then say you're worth $20 billion. There should have been more maturity and more common sense in some of those
things.
Because
pick up your Swiss Re Sigma and it says P&C is worth, 7 trillion?
I think, yeah.
Something like 7 trillion. I don't read it every year because it doesn't change that much. But yes, you're a complete fool if you think you can apply, I'll get 0.1% of that and then I'll be worth this.
Exactly. But that's what we were seeing. And I think it's been refreshing to see sort of common sense come into the conversation, which has been wonderful.
Right. We're almost going to move on from Insurtech because your report, because I think you took that figure of 95.4%. I don't know, what are the other 4% being invested in? Who knows? But it's probably still
also possibly AI. They just don't label themselves that way.
It's not explicitly AI.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the report is going really deeply and really interestingly into AI. And it's, I think now is absolutely the time to be doing this. So let's ask you a generic question about how do you view AI as an emerging casualty peril? There's a lot in your report about this, really interesting. And obviously, we're starting to see some Insurtech, some new businesses starting to address this.
I think we're going to see a trajectory that follows quite closely with what we saw cyber experience, particularly in the sort of 2017, 2018 space, where there is undoubtedly a risk class that emanates from digital exposure or digital outputs. And the market is going to have to determine whether or not the loss manifest sits in existing classes of business, or in fact, there is some sense in having a single business class, i.e. AI liability that picks up the unknown that people lean into. And I'm almost certain that that is what is going to happen. So some of the D&O policies, some of the E&O policies will probably expand some of their coverage and be clearer on certain language around AI. But I think that AI liability as a risk class will stand up alone. And we're already seeing that with companies like Testudo and R. Miller. And I think that will continue to grow. And I think the markets are pleased because it's an opportunity to grow, but also it's an opportunity to become A, more sophisticated, but B, put more sophistication into those traditional classes that are now under a little bit of stress because they're being interrogated in a way that they probably weren't 5 years ago.
When you pick up your general liability policy, you've got the war exclusion in there.
Yeah.
And do you think there will be an AI exclusion?
Possibly. Yeah, I think it's quite likely.
Out of your standard general liability. I would think back to, I don't know, whenever they invented the telephone, was it 1895, was it 1901? But you can imagine a liability underwriter of those days saying, these newfangled telephones are an absolute nightmare. Whereas before, it was pretty clear whether we were liable or not. But at least in commercial liabilities, everything had to be done. I had to send you a letter. You had to sign it and send it back. And it was pretty clear what we'd signed. You got my copy with your signature on it. And I've got your copy with my signature. And everyone could see what it was. And then we can argue about what those words mean. But then it came to a moment, suddenly it was people were starting to do business on the telephone, God forbid. People started buying insurance over the telephone, didn't they? But it took until about the 1980s to start doing that. But it came to a point where telephone was just embedded. It's not excluded from general liability or from professional indemnity because it's just the way we are. I mean, AI is already becoming embedded in almost everything. Do you think you can exclude it? If your standard general liability clause says, I will insure you for all the liabilities arising out of your normal activities as a company, or whatever it is, that operative clause at the beginning. And then you have all the exclusions and the clarifications behind it. But if AI is just what we do, it goes wrong, then we're liable.
Yeah, no, I think the guardrails will go in. I think wording will become clearer. And I think to your point, we are seeing AI permeate so much of society that it is going to be very difficult in some cases to distinguish between what is just a function of society versus what is AI specific and per the wording of your contract is delegated out. But I think actually what we're seeing at the moment, Mark, is that one of the biggest drivers of loss is not actually something specifically going wrong. It's that people's expectations have been mismanaged about what the outcome should be. And so as an industry, we are just going to have to probably see some of those bigger losses come through and have the court litigate some of those guardrails about what is explicitly delegated AI that should be carved out from policies versus what is just part of everyday life now as we're evolving.
Obviously, when you have very AI-specific companies saying, hey, I'll come and do some AI-related thing that will improve your business, it's almost that the insurance could be a wrapper around that company.
Absolutely.
To say, you're making a lot of claims about this AI, and we're going to help.
And I think also what we will see in the courts is, let's take a chatbot output that gets taken to court over a claim that wasn't articulated properly. Is it the AI manifest that's the issue? Is it the person that trained the AI model in the first place that's the issue? Is it the sentiment that was put into the modeling process over time that's the issue? Are you going to be able to get into the modeling cycle closely enough to see where the deviation could have come from? And was that done by a third party? It's going to be a very interesting road ahead. But I think ultimately, it's great that the industry has been so forthcoming about this issue. I mean, nobody's hiding from this. And I think the fact that we can write a 120-page report about it is indicative of the fact that there's a lot going on.
Back in the old days, I remember I was doing liability business and, you had electromagnetic fields. This is if you're doing the liabilities of a big utility, electricity utility, this is a big deal. And there were plenty of underwriters back in the 90s who would say, Mark, let's not talk about this because the minute we talk about it, we've got a problem.
Yeah.
Can we just keep it silent, please?
No, the industry has been very forthcoming. And I think, again, Silent Cyber has probably been a great recent enough event for people to realize that there's actually no value in shying away from this. Let's talk about it. Let's experiment. Let's be pragmatic as a community, as an industry. And I think a lot of the innovation, somewhat perversely, that is being talked about in the liability case might also be the same sets of tools that help us solve the problem. I think AI is going to come to its own rescue.
When you go to an underwriter, there's always a moment in an underwriting conversation, particularly when you're trying to do something entrepreneurial. There's a moment where they often say, well, this is really not insurable. This is not the sort of thing we want to get involved in because this is an enterprise risk. This is kind of an entrepreneurial risk that the venture capitalists should be taking this risk on our behalf. It's not really something that an insurer should be doing. So again, when you get to the point where you're almost trying to say, I'm validating this AI and this process of methodology, do you think insurers would be comfortable with that? Because you're getting very close to the enterprise risk of that AI business itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's unique to AI, and I think every industry really goes through that situation. But I think that venture capital is there to stand up the businesses. The businesses are there to, if they're on the liability detection side, to play a role where they're trying to help the industry move forward. If they're in the production side, almost inherent of the nature of AI, without very sort of closed caption modeling techniques, it will start to evolve in a way that requires a lot of scrutiny. But I do think that insurance has got to play a role in this because there are going to be losses, and there are going to be losses that are going to be very complicated. And I think for our society to be able to continue experimenting and getting the best out of AI, insurance has got to come along as part of that journey. I mean, I can't imagine a situation where we as a society more broadly could be contemplating autonomous vehicles or delegated workflows or generated chat without the safety net of somebody who's managing the financial downside. It would be a very different exploration into what is potentially the most important technological innovation ever. So it has to play a role alongside the venture capitalists.
And your report has already identified problems because there was an interesting detail there that AI is causing losses. There's only half of them are not being insured. And what sort of losses are these?
Well, I think a lot of them probably at the moment fall into those traditional, is it D&O, is it not? Is it E&O, is it not? And I think because we're not at that stage of maturity, it probably is falling into those traditional losses. I think as well, particularly in the States where a lot of the litigation is happening, I think it comes back to the point I made earlier, which is your expectation of what the outcome ought to be and is therefore not covered because you never explicitly said in the first place what you thought your expectations were. But because we don't have a hugely mature AI liability specific class of business that everybody has access to, all the other claims are having to pick up the slack, essentially.
Yeah, so it seems inevitable. Of course, because regulation's way behind. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's bound to be. Things are moving so fast. We were talking in the last couple of years. I mean, I started asking people about AI only a couple of years ago. And now I can't not talk
every
about
conversation,
it.
right.
And we're talking to the point where, pick up any news, even the front page of a newspaper is moving faster than us. And we're talking about, potential cyber liabilities when we're talking about today with, Claude Mythos being withheld because it could undermine the internet as we know it. Absolutely fascinating. So litigation is just bound to happen in the absence of very clear new laws and experience moving ahead so much faster than regulation and than legislation. Would you say litigation is just absolutely inevitable?
I think so. I think particularly as it's burgeoning and evolving, I think a lot of what we will later agree on as sort of hard and fast rules will probably have come out of the courtroom. So I think it's inevitable.
The way of attacking this, and again, you have to read this report, is absolutely amazing. There's so much in this, but you get to the point where you're starting to highlight a pathway to solving this problem, and you highlight some of those businesses which have reminded me that I must get them on the show now.
Absolutely.
Actually, I really want to talk to them. But one of the methods, of course, how do we evaluate the efficacy of an AI, or to say, is this AI better than the other AI? These are two risks that are being presented to me by a broker. I'm an underwriter. Which one do I think is better? And then how do I go about creating a methodology by which I measure, I model, I say this one is better than that one, and this one should have a lower premium than that one?
Yeah, I think it's the same as any pricing discussion, really. It's understanding what the long tail impact might be of it going awry. But also there is a huge amount of court data that will give you an indication of what things typically end up costing. But these are always within the context of physical losses or casualty losses. And so I think that the actual indemnification part of it is probably still quite well defined. I think where the real headache is A, to what extent has the AI model been trained and left to its own devices in that sort of agentic way, or to what extent have things been determined that people don't really understand? But without having the ability to scrutinize that as the underwriter, I think people are probably still taking most of their indications from what's the worst case scenario of, let's say, there's a manufacturing plant using AI to build things that may explode. It's understanding what the amplification nexus is of there being AI versus not being AI. And I think, again, it's going to be a series of real big losses that help an underwriter ultimately understand how to start thinking about this risk.
There's a great section in your report about the ways that AI has been evaluated to date. But what struck me was we're sort of saying 98% of AIs can do what a PhD student used to be able to do 10 years ago. And then it's getting more and more advanced. And obviously, these are sort of tests set by a human to say, right, AI, if you can do this, then you're done well. You're passing the sort of Turing test or whatever you want to call these things. You wouldn't need to be very imaginative to think that it's only been about a couple of years. We're already getting to the point of most PhD students are not going to be clever enough to set a new test for the AI.
Okay.
So at what point do we have to start using AI to test AI?
Oh, wow.
In which case,
we're really
are we getting
into
into a metaphysical question here? Which AI do you trust?
I'm a firm believer that humans are never going away in this. I think that ultimately, if we're not consuming something that's a net positive, then what's the point? And I think even with the most intelligent AI tools, most of them are still, if they're a text AI organization, they're still scraping what they want to be raw material, which is inevitably come from a human being.
We're not going to be necessarily any good at predicting the future, because when you go to sort of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the old Black Swan, fantastic. Everyone has to read the Black Swan. There's a chart of relative happiness of a turkey over its lifetime, and it goes from sort of 1st of January, and it goes up and up and up and up and up. Suddenly it gets to 24th of December, and it's, because it's Christmas, and it goes back straight to zero. So it's sort of about putting things in the right context.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I suppose you could have the AI that was doing an amazing job of predicting hotel occupancy. In fact, there were some parametric insurance products around 2019, and then suddenly we had a pandemic, and suddenly, oh God, it's just exactly like the turkey has now had its neck wrung, and it's now in the oven. And everything that happened before is now all over. So one thing, at least humans, we've got on our side is that we're better at adapting to new data.
And there's gut experiences, right? And even that example, I mean, the chances of a global pandemic happening are small, but not zero. But if the model doesn't have the nuanced ability to factor in the unlikely but possible, it's never going to show up in its predictions. And again, I come back to this point of, if we're not ultimately seeing a benefit from it, then I don't think the use cases are going to last very long. Now, is there going to be disruption along the way? Absolutely. But there are jobs that exist now that didn't exist 50 years ago, that didn't exist 10 years ago. And I think that as a very bullish, optimistic person, AI is actually going to create more opportunities for us to be even more creative and more human, ironically.
On the creativity question, it's more specifically about cyber, but then I expect a large percentage of that 95% of all the funding is going to be something cyber related, or a lot of them will be anyway. It's to say it's a large cohort, so it's probably worth talking about specifically. With AI now, agentic AI in the hands of hackers, we've always got that eternal question of, we've got nuclear power for good, you've got nuclear weapons that are bad. You've got that asymmetry always with something like cyber, whereas you've got 1,000 holes in your system, you plug 999 of them, you thought you did a fantastic job, but of course the hacker only needs one.
Yeah.
So it's asymmetrical, it's not fair. They only need one to get in and make a loss. For defense, agentic AI, you're sort of hamstrung. You're bringing a knife to a gunfight because you can't let it wildly loose on your system because things might happen. It might shut your whole system down and then no one can get cash out of the cash machine and you're in deep trouble. Whereas, of course, a hacker doesn't care. They can just let it loose. So there's that asymmetrical problem. They can do stuff that you can't. Do you think we're ever going to keep up? It's probably the question in the cyber world, particularly now. Obviously, it's become a massive cyber question.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't know if you are with the first Blade Runner movie. I always sort of think of that scene where the machine is being interrogated and they're looking for that one thing that lets the interrogator know, oh, they're not human. And I think there are technologies now that are allowing us to stay apace. And I think ultimately it's going to come down to who wants this more. And I think the side of the defender usually wins, but the issues will continue to evolve. But we are already seeing AI being used to detect AI with things like claims fraud detection, specifically with pictures of smashed up cars, right? Sometimes it's quite hard to detect what is real and what is not.
Because, of course, fraudsters are now using AI to have fake crash pictures.
But they can actually be trained to detect what is AI generated. Similarly, I saw a presentation a couple of weeks ago where somebody was doing an experiment on faked hail damage on US roofs, and they were just using a hammer to sort of smash holes into the roofs, and the AI tool could detect almost immediately what was fake and what was real. And so I think the kind of catch-22, like I say, will be about who's prepared to put more people at work on this particular project to kind of win the arms race. But with AI, the vector keeps changing, right? Like every time you think you understand something, it has evolved by its nature. But I think that on balance, it's a lot more positive to come out of this than those sorts of negatives.
Well, you sound very optimistic.
I am a very optimistic person.
Well, again, I keep going back to this report because it's so impressive. I think everyone listening must read it. And I just thank you for increasing the general IQ
Thank you.
of the debate and the level of the debate. It's fantastic. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about that we haven't spoken about yet?
Nothing sort of specifically, but you sort of started the conversation so excellently when we were even just revisiting some of those old technologies. And I would say to anybody that is particularly concerned with this right now, there was a period of time when we were all told that blockchain was going to completely transform the industry. No one talks about any kind of distributed ledger technology ever. And so I think there are lots of apocryphal tales in the tech scrapyard that surrounds our industry. I do think AI is fundamentally different. I don't think it's a technology that sort of antiquates itself. But deployed in the right way, I think it makes our industry more interesting than it's ever been. And I'm personally really, really excited about all of the opportunities that it presents us with.
So the idea of the enhanced underwriter, the enhanced broker is a very sensible one to cling on to. We're not being sold a pup.
No, I think as long as the human expert in the loop is being celebrated, and I think as long as the technology is doing what it does best, which is predictable, menial, rote tasks that free up people's time to focus on growing businesses, being strategically more adept, enhancing relationships with people, then I don't see how we can get this wrong. I think standing around and doing nothing is probably the worst thing we could do, and we're not doing that.
I suppose, and it's the way that we're going to reduce the protection gap.
Yes.
Because we're going to bring the costs down finally.
Bring the costs down, but also technology by its nature is transcendental, right? So we can get into pockets of demographics of people that have historically been blocked by physical barriers, and the cost of an intermediary being less of an issue means that certain lower cost business is now profitable, which means that we can get coverage to those people. And I just see it as a win for everybody. I really do.
So basically, there's going to be more opportunity for every broker and underwriter listening out there not going to be unemployed.
Again, I'm a very bullish person. Yeah, I think so.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, Don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this program. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. The Voice of Insurance podcast is produced in association with Advantage Go, enabling enterprise scale underwriting through a single pane of glass. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.